Okay, Marian, thank you so much for this opportunity. Actually, this opportunity is really precious to me because we have been fighting for a while to have room to talk about fungal diseases. And I believe the International Society for Neglected and Tropical Diseases is the right place for this kind of discussion. Thank you also to those participating in the webinar. I really appreciate it. And these days, of course, nothing is more important than fighting the pandemic. But I think we need to keep in mind that there will be a tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, we have to be ready to back to our daily fights. And I think this kind of discussion is really nice to keep us connected with the near future. So anyway, the infectious diseases related problems, they will continue to exist, and I think we need to discuss them in general. So thank you also to my colleague and friend Leonardo Nimrichter, who will be available to participate in the debate. And I'll be talking today about some simple organisms causing very complex problems. But before we go into the problems, I would like to give you a general idea of our institution in Brazil. Fiocruz is actually a national system in Brazil related to dealing with health problems. And we have units all across the country. And the main campus is in Rio de Janeiro, but I work in the south unit of Fiocruz, in the Carlos Chagas Institute in the city of Curitiba, which is South Brazil. But coming back to the problems, I will start talking about the complex problems that fungal diseases are related to, and then we are going to discuss some possible solutions and the place where we are now when you talk about fungal diseases. So the first complex problem related to fungal diseases is that too many humans are affected each year by fungal infections. So the Global Action Funding for Fighting Fungal Diseases, which is GAFI, estimates that nearly 1 billion people per year have a fungal infection, which makes this kind of disease very common. It's only behind these regular diseases like headaches and dental caries and so on. So fungal diseases are really common in human nature. But some of these diseases can get really serious. For example, they also estimate that over 1 million eyes go blind each year because of fungal infections. And after all, it is estimated that more than 1 million people die per year because of fungal diseases. This is a lot. If you think about diseases that everybody knows that are really lethal, like tuberculosis and malaria, they are in the same range. So we have a lot of people dying because of fungal diseases. The problem is especially big in Brazil. A group in the city of São Paulo people suffer from fungal diseases in Brazil, and the treatment options, they are really limited and they are too expensive. I'm coming back to this topic in a couple of slides. And fungal infections, they affect mostly immunocompromised people, like Marianne said during the introduction. And it's important to keep in mind that this is a big problem because we still have a lot of people suffering from AIDS all around the globe. And in some continents like Africa, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, it is a big problem. You have a lot of people immunocompromised there, and fungal infections, they are really common and lethal there. So we have a very serious situation. The second complex problem is related to the fact that there are no licensed fungal vaccines. So it's really hard to protect people against fungal infections because there are no vaccines. Yes, you have people doing good research related to this topic, but we still have nothing licensed. And as I said before, the current treatment options, they're really expensive, and in general, they are toxic. For example, the most important antifungal to fight systemic fungal infections. Systemic fungal infections are the infections caused by fungi, and they can go everywhere in your body. So any organ can be affected. These are the most serious fungal infections. The most important antifungal, it is still amphotericin B, which was discovered in the 50s. So it's a really old drug. And if you use, for example, the less toxic preparations of amphotericin B, they are the limited forms of amphotericin B. They're really, really expensive. Just to give you a general idea, in my country, one patient receiving treatment with liposomal amphotericin B against a systemic fungal infection, it can cost over $100,000 per patient. And this is a lot. For example, if you use the example of Cryptococcal Meningitis, which is a very lethal fungal disease, it is estimated that we have almost 7,000 people with Cryptococcal Meningitis in Brazil. If you give the appropriate treatment to each of these patients, you're going to spend like $800 million. And this money is not available in the public system. So although there are therapeutic options, they are too toxic, too expensive, and the money to find to use this appropriate treatment is just not available in the public system. And it's always important to remind that the currently used antifungals, they have a lot of problems. They can cause toxicity to the liver, to the kidneys, and so on. So we really need new, affordable, and less toxic antifungal alternatives. But this is, of course, not simple, because innovation in the field of fungal infections, it's too slow. Just to give you an idea, a practical example, the last antifungal to be used in clinics, to be introduced in clinics, was caspofungin, and this is already 18 years old. From caspofungin to now, we have research on new antifungals, but we have nothing new introduced into clinics. And maybe this is related to different problems. I'm coming back to this in a few slides. But apparently, we have done some research on this topic a few years ago, but apparently the field is excessively focused on basic research. So maybe one important discussion related to this problem is to have more, is to stimulate applied research, to have new practical tools like vaccines and antifungals. Again, this is not simple, because this is not a matter of investing money on the topic. This picture shows really clearly that there is no correlation to the investment that you make in new drugs with the discovery of new drugs. So this blue histogram here shows that people are investing more money in drug development. Number of drugs being introduced into clinics is not linearly related to investment. So we are talking about a very complex issue. A lot of people in this field and other fields, actually, we are seeing this in the pandemic now, are discussing the idea of repurposing drugs, already existing drugs approved for use in humans, to be used in other diseases. In fungal infections, this is true, and we are seeing a lot of this right now in the pandemic. And in fungal infection examples, for example, you have clinical trials testing, let's say, sertraline, which is an antidepressant agent, which is able to inhibit fungal growth too. But we don't have a lot of different trials underway right now. And another problem with the fact that innovation is really slow in the field of fungal disease is that we don't have many diagnostic tests available. For some diseases, this is already solved. For Cryptococcal Meningitis, that's the case. But for many others, it is a big problem. For example, if you don't diagnose correctly histoplasmosis, which is a lung disease, many people are getting treatment against tuberculosis because the symptoms are really similar. But if you have histoplasmosis and you don't have the appropriate treatment, you can die in up to 3 weeks. So it's really important to diagnose correctly when you have serious fungal infections. And another big problem in the field is that access is really limited to antifungals. So I was talking a few minutes before about amphotericin B. Again, it's still a major antifungal to be used against systemic infections. But look, it isn't available in many regions of the globe. And especially in Africa, where Cryptococcal Meningitis, for example, is devastating, amphotericin B is not available in many of the countries that need amphotericin B for treating Cryptococcal Meningitis. And this is true actually for other antifungals. For example, flucytosine, which is a very old and cheap drug, it is really useful for treating a lot of different diseases, including cryptococcal meningitis too. It is not available in countries like Brazil, Argentina, the whole continent of Africa, Canada. So access, it is a problem when you talk about fungal diseases. And of course, you have a lot of pressure coming from the market too. So last year, for example, the community had a lot of problems with big pharma companies. I'm talking specifically about the example of liposomal amphotericin B, which is no longer under patent, but the technology related to manufacturing amphotericin B, it is still controlled. It was until last year, at least, controlled by Gilead. And Gilead didn't want to share this technology with other institutions. So it was impossible to manufacture generic amphotericin B. So this is actually related to access too, because sometimes you have the antifungal solution, but you don't have access to the drug. So it is a problem indeed. And you can never ignore, we're living situations like this these days with a viral pandemic, but you can never ignore the unknown. If you talk about fungal infections, it is similar. So last year, there was a big noise related to the spread of Candidiasis all around the globe. It was in the media, actually, it was really strong. And Candidiasis is really dangerous because it is a drug-resistant pathogen, and the mortality rates related to these pathogens are really high. They can go up to 60%. And resistance against antifungals is really common in this bug. And this is actually related to a number of issues. So Candidiasis is all around the globe these days. And we suppose that the bug is actually present in many different countries that are not in blue in this slide. But the problem is that you need an appropriate diagnosis and notification of the disease too. And this is actually related to something that we face every day, because now it's really, really likely that the Candidiasis spread came from global warming. Global warming has been discussed as something really efficient in selecting pathogens. And it's interesting because last year, the Candidiasis problem was really big. It was under discussion all around the world. But look, in 2010, Arturo Casadevall and his team in the US already warned the community that global warming could be really important, a really important factor during the selection of new fungal diseases. So the relationship between the environment and the human diseases is clear, and we need to keep an eye open to monitor the situation. And another big problem related to fungal infections is the fact that public health authorities, they are not aware of the size of the problem. So just to give you a few, cryptococcal, Arturo said this a few years ago, it was understood like a disease that was so neglected that was not even recognized as a neglected disease. This, of course, is a big problem because when you have an important disease that is not recognized by WHO, it is really difficult to have, for example, a public program to stimulate combating the disease. So it's really important that societies like this one and WHO recognize that this is a big problem, because this is something that directly impacts governments in general when they have to take a decision. And of course, if you don't have recognition from the public health authorities, you have a problem of funding. For example, if you go into the define the reports, this kind of report, they map funding for different neglected diseases. If you look for fungal diseases there, it's really disappointing because, of course, you have very important infectious diseases that receive funding. Funding is never enough. So it's, of course, AIDS deserves a lot of funding, malaria too, tuberculosis too. But you have a big difference when you compare fungal diseases with these diseases because the mortality is really similar. And look, for example, if you go into the define the report of 2 or 3 years ago, tuberculosis got $500,000 million to fight the disease. It was 100 times more than cryptococcal meningitis got. If you normalize funding according to the disease, you have a big imbalance. For example, for each patient dying from cryptococcal meningitis, you have $8. It is completely different from the $400 that you get for tuberculosis and $1,000 that you have for malaria. So this is actually the 2016 estimates, and 2 years later, the situation was not really different. So there's a big imbalance between the importance of the disease and the funding that you have to fight this disease. And I'm talking about cryptococcal meningitis because people recognize that this is a big problem of human health. But if you go to mycosis with smaller mortality, it's much worse. So if you take a look at the funding that you have reporting in publications for diseases like mycetoma, sporotrichosis, paracoccidioidomycosis, malaria, if you compare to crypto and malaria, look, the percent that you have of reported funding is really, really slow. So of course, we need more funding to fight fungal diseases. And if you take these problems together, of course, the question that comes is what to do to change the situation. Of course, the situation could be better if you have compulsory notification of fungal diseases, if you had, for example, programs to support vaccines and antifungals and diagnostic tests, if you have, for example, an improved access to antifungals, if you have programs, for example, to support the research on basic knowledge. But if we use the existing tools, the problem could be smaller too. For example, David Denning, some 4 or 5 years ago, he calculated that if you apply the correct tools, the existing tools, to fight fungal diseases, you could say, for example, by this year, 500,000 lives could be saved. So, of course, we need new tools, but the appropriate use of the existing tools is important too. But one problem that we need to face every day, and once again, I appreciate the opportunity of having the discussion here, is to increase the awareness about fungal diseases. So mechanisms to make people aware of this kind of problem, they are really important. So we have to bring this to the media, to the general population, to the medical community, to researchers in general, and of course to public health authorities. And there are a number of different ways to do this. One way to do this is to get the problem being discussed in scientific journals. So I have to acknowledge that PLOS, Neglected and Tropical Diseases, has been really supportive over these recent years. So we have some series of papers being published there to make people aware of the problem of fungal infections. Other journals partners in the field, but maybe we can do something else. And I like to use this example here. So I need to talk again about Arturo Casadevall. Arturo Casadevall is actually a physician who is a mycologist too, but he's really into fighting infectious diseases. And Arturo has been talking about serum therapy against infectious diseases for many years. So just to give you an example here, this is a 26-years old paper talking about serum therapy against infectious diseases. And now there's a big movement all around the globe to use plasma from coronavirus patients to treat new patients. So this is really being discussed right now. It's being tested in many countries. But it's interesting that Arturo, when he tried to raise the discussion, he published this kind of idea, not in a scientific journal, but in a regular newspaper. So I highlighted here this sentence that he wrote that is really, really important for us to discuss the topic of bringing attention to important diseases. He said, "I knew if I could get this into a newspaper, people would react. Whereas if I put it into a science journal, I might not get the same reaction." So this is something that we really need to think about. Of course, this is not the time. This is the time to fight the pandemic. But once again, in the near future, we have this we need to have this kind of idea discussion. And we need to acknowledge that some important centers for fighting infectious diseases are taking actions. For example, the US CDC, they have a program to make people aware of fungal diseases. They have each year a fungal disease awareness week, and they have a lot of graphic material to make people aware of the size of this kind of problem. And after all that we want is to save lives. We have too many people dying from fungal diseases, and we need to pay attention to this kind of thing. And after all, I think this is the take-home message. This is an editorial published in Nature Microbiology a couple of years ago. We need to stop neglecting fungi. And I'll finish this presentation very grateful again to the Society and to Marianne for the opportunity to have this discussion here. And I'll be ready to take and answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
And you had a few questions, Marcio, first and foremost, that came up during your talk. First of all, we've got a couple here from Gert van Awera. Gert is from the molecular parasitology department at ITM Antwerp, who was asking a little bit more detail about how many classes or species of fungi are known to cause human or animal disease, and also how are fungi transmitted?
Yeah, so that kind of question was much easier 10 years ago, because actually we have millions of different fungal species in nature, but only a few of them are able to cause disease. So in general, fungal cells, they don't like to grow at 37 degrees. A few of them can do it, and these in general are the pathogenic species. And so comparing to the number of different species that you have in nature, the number of pathogens is really slow. So most of the important pathogens, they are acquired through inhalation of environmental fungal species. So just to make a long story short, most of them are in the environment. You get in contact with them all the time. Usually you inhale them, and in general, you don't have disease. But if you have some kind of immunosuppression, you can become highly susceptible to get a fungal disease. So diseases like histoplasmosis, cryptococcosis, paracoccidioidomycosis, blastomycosis, they are all acquired through inhalation. But you have a lot of different fungal diseases caused in the skin or under the skin, and you can get in contact with them in response to a trauma, let's say to have your skin broken, and then you have introduction of the fungi in the subcutaneous tissues, and then you're going to have sporotrichosis or chromoblastomycosis, and you have the superficial mycosis too, like infections of the nails or the hair. So these ones, they are not too serious. But you can have disease from fungal pathogens that are already in contact with you, like Candidiasis. In general, you have Candida in your different mucosas, and if you have some imbalance in your immunological state, or if you're getting antibiotics, you can be susceptible to have Candidiasis too. So you have a lot of different important fungal diseases. Many of them are acquired from the environment through inhalation, but you have many others too.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's really valuable information. You had a question and also a comment here from Francis in Angolet Olaki. Hello, Francis. Glad you managed to connect today. Who is a public health veterinarian and is speaking from Katakwi in Uganda. So he has a special interest in zoonotic diseases, and histoplasmosis occasionally attacks turkeys in Uganda. Could we take special interest in zoonotic fungal disease control? And perhaps this is, again, another maybe set of colleagues or just a different angle that could also boost kind of the advocacy for fungal diseases.
Well, that's a very important topic. First of all, it's it's sad because we're about to have the International Cryptococcus meeting in Uganda this year. It was postponed because of the pandemic, but it's a country really important for fighting fungal disease, and you have a lot of nice research there. As far as zoonotic transmission of fungal diseases, yes, actually I was not aware of this association of turkeys with histoplasmosis. It's really interesting to hear about it. But yes, the problem is too big. For example, in Brazil, we have a very big problem with sporotrichosis, which is being transmitted from cats to humans with an unbelievable highly frequency. So yes, when you think about fungal infections, you need to have everything together: human diseases, environmental research, and veterinary research too, because they're all really interconnected. For example, in Rio de Janeiro, my city, my regional city in Brazil, you have an important association with deforestation and parcoxyriomycosis too, and with the spread of sporotrichosis too, because you have new individuals, humans or animals, exposed to fungal cells due to the mess that you do with the environment, and the numbers are really important. So yes, the concept of One Health is really important for fungal diseases, and we need to consider veterinary infections for sure, and environmental distribution of fungal species as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And for those who are interested in that aspect of things, there's also a little bit more detail and a really nice discussion and contributions from Olivier Espace, who is Public Affairs Director at SIVA Animal Health. So I invite you all to follow that on the chat. And hello, Olivier. Our next question is from Ute Helmisch. Are resistances in fungi acquired similarly to the way bacteria do via the accumulation of mutations and overexpression of resistance pumps? Is this process slower than in bacteria due to different transmission routes or slower replication rates of the fungi? And Ute is a biochemist with an interest in African sleeping sickness and bacterial MDR and works at Mainz University in Germany.
That's a good question, because resistance, I actually didn't mention in the presentation, it is a big issue in fungal infections. Resistance, for example, to azoles, it's really common. So first of all, the examples that I use, they're more frequent in the Cryptococcus field, because this is the field that I am familiar with. But it's a problem with other infections too. So resistant to azoles, it's really important. In some regions of Africa and other countries, for example, you have like 30% resistance. So it is a big problem. And yes, you have different mechanisms of resistance, because you can, alter the target because of mutations. You can have the expression of efflux pumps that will expel the drug outside, and then it's not going to make any change. You can change your molecular target so the drug will not meet its regular target, and then it's not going to act. But yes, in terms of the molecules involved, you're going to find a lot of difference if you compare bacteria and fungal cells. But the mechanism in general, changing the targets, mutations, getting the drugs out, they are similar.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. You've also got a very nice thank you from Francis, who thanks you for your response to his inquiry. Adam Taherali, Diogo Cuchera, Frederic Moiron, hello, and everyone saying thank you. Nice talk, Marcio, and thank you for this interesting webinar. We've got here a question from Omar Harb, who is based at the University of Pennsylvania with VEU PathDB genomic databases, including FungiDB. So Omar's question is, or comment, I think one additional thing that we need to consider is that not only fungal diseases are in humans, but also they are affecting the food chain. Fungi affecting crops could result in major famine across the world. And are there programs that monitor fungi affecting the food chain, and how concerned should we be? And perhaps I would just link that to an earlier question, another question by Gert, which is just asking about you know, what's the kind of quality of surveillance at WHO of fungal diseases?
Wow, that's an important topic. First of all, I really don't know if there are programs to monitor fungi in specific terms. I don't know about the programs because I'm more into the human diseases field. But yes, that's a big problem. That once again, everything is connected. So first of all, yes, it is totally true. You have a lot of a very significant percentage of food that is thrown away each year because of fungal contamination. So fungal contamination in crops, for example, they have a big financial impact. And of course, everybody knows that after all, you're wasting food, and this is not acceptable at all. But there's something more, because usually to control fungal contamination in the fields, you can select resistant isolates that can cause resistant infections in human patients. And also, it is now known that you can increase the virulence of a fungal pathogen in nature. So for those who are not familiar with this, virulence is the ability of a microbe to cause damage to its host. And so it's already known that if you try to control fungal contamination in crops, for example, you can increase the virulence of an environmental species that will further cause disease in humans. So you get in contact with more resistant and more virulent strains. So coming back to the question, I'm not aware of the programs, but I would say that you have nice people taking care of it. But the problem is not only big because of the waste of food, but also because you can select more resistant and more aggressive pathogens.
Okay. Thank you, Marcio. You've just had a few more thank yous as well from Fiona Allen, here with the Natural History Museum in London. Hello, Fiona. And Jambon Guillem. Very nice talk, Marcio. So thank you to everyone for joining today. We've kind of run a little bit over the sort of scheduled 30 minutes, Marcio. So we don't want to hold you, for a long time, but I was wondering whether you might have time for one or two last questions.
So of course, I'm totally available, and I have to say that many of the Nostoc's message, they come from France, so don't be too impressed.
So they are good friends. Okay, so one more question from Leonardo Nimrichter. So not only a friend, but a colleague and co-author, perhaps, I think.
Yes. Very good friend and collaborator.
Brilliant. Hello, Leonardo. You come with a great introduction there. So he's saying, great talk, Marcio. We have a current problem with sporotrichosis here in Rio de Janeiro and other few cities. Do you think it could spread out to other states and countries?
Yes, I think so. Leonardo, thanks for your question. Everybody should know that this is a very close collaborator and brilliant mycologist. And yes, I think it's totally possible because it's not fast, but it's really hard to control. For example, in Rio, the biggest problem related to this disease is that it's really hard to monitor that the cats are being treated. So many of them, they are actually street cats, and they go around, you don't know where they go, and it's impossible to keep control on the effectiveness of their treatment. So with this kind of move, it's 100% possible. And one thing that is really common in many different countries is that when you mess up with the soil, let's say through constructions of new buildings and centers, you have a higher exposure of workers, for example, and animals to fungal pathogens that were just there in the soil, like normal environmental microbes. So yes, it could spread. It's a kind of unpredictable, I would say, but I think it's 100% possible that it's going to be everywhere. So you really have to take care of this relationship between the environment, veterinary health, and human health too.
Brilliant. Gustavo Goldman has just added that more precisely, 30% of the food is lost because of pre and post-harvest fungal contamination.
Yeah,
Just adding a bit of detail there.
That's good. Thank you, Gustavo. I didn't remember the right number, but I remember that it was really high.
Perfect. And one last question we've got here from Helena Uliartha from the Ministry of Health Indonesia. Selamat sore, Helena. Hello. Dr. Marcio, do you have any experience with Maduro foot, aka mycetoma?
No, I'm sorry, but we are more here in our group into systemic diseases, and we are into the Cryptococcus model. So we recognize that mycetoma is a terrible, terrible, terrible disease that requires a lot of attention, but that's not really our expertise here in our lab.
Well, we'll probably touch on mycetoma in the next few weeks. We've got a panel. We've got a panel from featuring a lot of colleagues from the NDI and so forth. So hopefully we can look at that a little bit more specifically.
I think it deserves a lot of attention because it's a devastating disease.
Absolutely. I was just smiling because Helena replied so. Hi, Helena. So more on mycetoma coming up in the future. Well, Marcio, I think you've really made the case very clear today, certainly for fungal diseases. It sounds like it kind of ticks all it's the perfect neglected disease story, whether it's the lack of diagnosis or the issues about access, outdated or toxic treatments, and kind of difficulties speeding up the pipeline in that sense. So hopefully we'll see some movement in that very soon. I just kind of, to round off, had a final question, whether how has it been in terms of trying to foster collaborations or engaging the what I'll call the HIV community, or even those who are looking at immunocompromised patients who are having cancer therapies? Are those also alliances that you feel would really boost the attention and the advocacy for fungal diseases?
I think so. It's a very good point, and we are lucky to have in the mycology community a lot of great groups working with clinics and connecting the generation of knowledge with the disease in humans in general. So this is really strong in Fiocruz in Brazil, in the Pasteur Institute in France, in many countries in Africa. In the UK, it is really strong too, in the US too. So I think, after all, we have a really interconnected scientific community that is really trying to make bridges between the bench and the bench. And I think there's a lot of space, a lot of room to improve the situation through this kind of association. After all, we know that it is all really slow. You mentioned very appropriately in the introduction that fungal infections were only recognized as important human disease in the 80s. So you cannot compare other diseases in terms of the generation of knowledge and the translation of this knowledge into clinical application if you compare with bacterial infection or viral infections. But yes, it is going on. We need to be aware that this is not fast. It is really risky, and the level of success is always slow. But yes, I think the community is interconnected, and maybe we're going to have something new soon. In general, it is a friendly community. Competition in general is not an issue in most of the fungal research, and I think we're going to be fruitful in a near future.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we'd like to echo your call for any partnerships loud and clear across the world and across diseases and sectors and fields and organizations. And perhaps we could all have our radars switched on next September for when you mentioned to us the Fungal Awareness Week. So maybe a first step we could all take is towards the end of September to make sure we're all aware of the campaigns and to perhaps echo that and amplify that within our colleagues and our organizations and so forth.
So Marian, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. And we are ready to help with anything. And again, the mycology network is friendly and very efficient. If there's something we can do, we are going to be ready to do it.
Brilliant. And anyone who wants to get in touch directly with you, please don't hesitate to let us know, and I'm sure we can exchange emails. Okay, well then, thank you very much, Marcio. I think we'll wrap up round about now. Thank you, everyone. Bye.